Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. The Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, this is one of those moments, like, where do I start with him? Where do I start with him? Because there is a most read story on the Bloomberg that involves AK-47s, Stinger missiles, and grenades to topple a government. That's the one story. I think it's the most read all day today. And then there is the Wall Street decries a hot, cummy summer after the surprise Democratic primary outcome for New York City mayors. So we've got a little bit of a wacky Wall Street roundup for you, courtesy of our own Sri Natarajan, chief Wall Street correspondent here at Bloomberg News, joining us in studio. Let's start with what is the most read story in the Bloomberg. Involves, as I said, AK-47s and so more, and a lot more. Who, what, where, and why?
Look, we write a lot about Wall Street bigwigs. We write a lot about CEOs and founders of big trading firms. I don't think I've ever written a story like this before. We'll probably get a chance to write another story where I get to say a Wall Street co-founder, one of the biggest Wall Street trading powerhouses, accidentally funded an attempt to topple the government in South Sudan. This is just maddening. So let's try and set the scene a little bit here. Last year...
For those on radio, Tim's mouth is open wide. He's like, what?
And these are just accusations at this point.
Yes.
These are allegations in court. But last year, there was a court case. There was a charging document that said two South Sudan activists, one of them, Peter Ajak, and for those in the human rights circles, a name well known to them because he was someone who was one of those lost boys of Sudan, a former child soldier who moved to the United States, studied at Harvard Kennedy School, then worked as a World Bank economist back in his home country in South Sudan, became an opposition activist, opposition leader, was imprisoned in South Sudan, and in 2020, after immense pressure on that country's government, was released, got asylum in the USA, and was a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. Super credentials. People in the State Department, people in the United States government knew who he was. But things went south soon after. According to allegations from the Department of Justice, he started scheming to put together a plot to procure weapons to smuggle into South Sudan. There is a ban, there is an embargo on taking weapons to South Sudan. But he decided, working with another activist, that a coup, a violent coup, an attempt to overthrow the current government, install himself as a new prime minister of a new democratic regime, was the best way forward. The only problem, well, two problems, was he was talking to undercover agents when trying to secure the arms. And where our interest comes in is the plan might have sounded great in his head. He lacked cash. What we found out in the last 2 weeks, and this is what piqued our curiosity, was the man who was fronting up that cash turned out to be a co-founder of Jane Street, Rob Granieri, because he has conceded, he's come out and said that, look, yes, I did provide the money to these guys, but I thought I was supporting human rights causes. I thought I was doing simple stuff like food and shelter and blankets and whatnot. He says he had no idea that this was going to be used for anything other than that, says he was defrauded and lied to. And, you know, even after having published the story, even after having spent the last week going through dockets, talking to so many people, this one is still hard to get your arms around.
Well, the web of names kind of grows bigger. And I think people will be familiar with some other characters who are involved in this story. How did Peter Ajak get connected to Rob Granieri?
And that goes to your point of the web of characters getting bigger and more prominent. The middleman in this case appears to have been Garry Kasparov, former world chess champion, who then, prominent Russian dissident, lives in the United States, was the chair of the Human Rights Foundation. He obviously got to know Peter Ajak through those circles. He knew Rob Granieri because, again, Granieri is at the top of Jane Street and therefore a firm that has made $21 billion in trading revenue last year. You can be rest assured someone atop that firm has a lot of money, and he's been donating. Look, he's backed political candidates like Nikki Haley's presidential bid. He's helped build a casino in Mississippi called the Scarlet Pearl, by the way. Quick shout out. out. And he's donated to a lot of humanitarian causes. So Kasparov knew both of these people. He's the one who connected the two of them. It appears that after a couple of meetings, Granieri thought everything was on the up and up, and he was ready to sign off on some $7 million over a course of 2 weeks in 2 different chunks. He passed on the money to Peter Ajak, and when Peter Ajak then started transferring bits of that money onto the arms exporter, or at least of the weapons agents who happened to be undercover United States federal agents, that's when problems started. They were arrested soon after, and that's why we find Granieri in this slightly, let's call it, embarrassing situation for now.
So for him, he's saying, I didn't know that this is where the money was going. I did give the money, but that's what's at issue.
That is what he's saying right now. Indeed, there will be a trial later this year. Peter Ajak and Abraham Keech, the other gentleman who has been accused in this case, have both pleaded not guilty. In fact, they've even indicated that they plan to use this public authority defense, which is basically saying, hey, we had the approval and the support of a government official. They're going to try and make the case that the United States government, or at least some elements of it, were backing their plan. The government obviously contends that, but that is the defense they plan to use.
God, it sounds like this should be a movie.
It should. I mean, it has all the ingredients of a movie. We only have a couple minutes left. I want to go to your other story that is among the most read too on the Bloomberg
We
terminal.
said it was going to be a little wacky
We
Wall Street
weren't
roundup.
planning to talk about this, but then just before our show started, you published this piece. It's about Wall Street decrying the hot commie summer of Zoran Mamdani's shock election.
So let's be very clear. When we call it the hot commie summer, that is not our view. This is what Wall Streeters are calling. Clearly,
one prominent Wall Streeter called it.
One prominent Wall Streeter called it. Many prominent Wall Streeters, I would say, echo it. The problem here seems to be that the New York City electorate, the voters, the Democratic voters, clearly seem to have rebuked this city's elite. You've gone for weeks and months on end where the city's billionaires, where the city's business owners, CEOs, senior executive has said a Zoran Mamdani as mayor of New York City would be catastrophic for the city. But look at the results last night for someone who had no name recognition, 3-4 months back, going up against the might of former New York City Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's not just the former New York City governor, but a part of a major New York State governor, and also part of a major New York political dynasty. For him to be able to take him on, not just keep it close, actually jump out ahead of him in the first round of primary, and all signs point to the idea that by the time we're done with this ranked choice voting, he could be the Democratic candidate for being mayor of New York City. That shows that there's a huge disconnect between the voters who have backed this campaign that came with a lot of style, verve, charisma, and populist appeal, and the city's leaders who have these, I think fair to say, exaggerated perhaps concerns of doom and gloom in the city if Zoran Mamdani were to become mayor.
And we should point out that Michael R. Bloomberg, founder and majority owner of Bloomberg News parent Bloomberg LP, was a supporter of Andrew Cuomo. All right. I mean, what we were reminded, and we just got about 30, 40 seconds here, Shri, is that a lot of what actually happens to New York City in terms of significant changes has to come out of Albany. Is he really going to change much for Wall Street? Just quickly.
And look, this is a point that other people have made it, and a lot of his proposals would require some level of tax hikes on the rich. A lot of his proposal would require the city taking on a huge amount of new debt. Kathy Hochul, the governor, isn't too enthused on any of those ideas. Doesn't look like she's going to be backing it. And those are parts of his platform that may not quite pan out as he has promised in the agenda. So there might have to be some compromise if he were to become mayor.
Amazing.
But clearly there's appeal.
Got a wacky story on Wall Street. This is your guy. Talk to Shri. Shri, thank you so much. Shri Natarajan, Bloomberg News Chief Wall Street Correspondent.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Now let's get to something else that's definitely been on our mind and the president's mind.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say Iran said its nuclear installations were, quote, badly damaged by U.S. airstrikes. It's the first such comments by Tehran as debate grows over how much the bombardment managed to dent the Islamic Republic's atomic program. The comments coming hours after President Trump disputed a U.S. intelligence report that said the attacks had limited impact on Iran's nuclear program below the ground. And Carol, an assessment from the Pentagon's intelligence agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, actually said the bombing likely didn't cripple the core components stored underground, including centrifuges.
We're super confused here. Hey, meantime, President Trump, he says he thinks the Israel-Iran war, it's over.
The way I look at it, they fought, the war's done, and, you know, I could get a statement that they're not going to go nuclear. We're probably going to ask for that, but they're not going to be doing it. But they're not going to be doing it anyway. They've had it. They've had it. Now, maybe someday in the future we'll want that. But I've asked Marco, do you want to draw, I just asked him the question as we were walking on the stage, do you want to draw up a little agreement for them to sign? Because I think we can get them to sign it. I don't think it's necessary.
All right, that, of course, was President Trump at the NATO press conference earlier today. Hey, let's get more on what we know about Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities and where that pile of uranium is. See what we know. John Areth is back with us, Senior Policy Director for the Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation. We've had him before. It's a nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to reducing and eventually eliminating the threats posed by nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. Hey, John, great to have you back with us. What do we really know at this point about Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities?
We know that the United States Air Force struck these last weekend, the facilities where the enrichment takes place and some of the other key facilities associated with the nuclear program. We know that they were heavily damaged. What we don't know is the precise degree of the damage, and I would argue that that's not that important. The White House uses the word obliterated. The initial reports coming out of the Defense Department that were unfortunately leaked seem to use some lesser adjectives. The degree of the adjective is not what is important. What is important is that the damage was significant in nature, and that at least for the moment, Iran is not able to enrich uranium.
For the moment,
so
I think yeah, well, I want to just cut you off for a second because for the moment, I think is a key phrase that I heard come from you just now. We've heard differing analyses based on intelligence just in recent days that says it could be set back a number of years or just set back a number of months. Do we know what the likely scenario is?
At this point, we don't. That's going to require some further analysis and quite frankly, I don't think we will know until we get some international inspectors on the ground there. That's what is useful for the time being, that we use this space for diplomacy. And part of that should be to request access for the IAEA, the UN watchdog agency, to get its inspectors in on the ground to assess what is the nature of Iran's enrichment program. And so that we can start building confidence that in the future, if there is a arrangement worked out, that we can have the confidence that Iran is not enriching, that it is not doing illicit activities of the sort that led to the cycle of violence that we have seen in recent days.
So, John, if they get those inspectors get on the ground and they're looking at the sites that were attacked, the targets by the U.S., do they also get access to Iran more broadly? So in other words, other installations or activities or capabilities when it comes to uranium enrichment or nuclear enrichment? Like, do they get a full picture or is it just what was hit? I'm just trying to get an idea of what they really have access to and what still might be unknowns after their visit, if they visit.
You ask a very good question. That will be a subject for very intense negotiations. In the past, Iran has always been very secretive, and they have always given the impression that they are hiding something. And this has led to a lack of confidence. I think what we want to achieve is a set of arrangements where there is confidence, where there is transparency, where there is confidence that Iran is not hiding something, that they are not putting on a show for the benefit of the inspectors and doing something behind the scenes. This is how we know that there is not some sort of illicit activity going on. And this is where we will have confidence that there is not a nuclear weapons program. Iran says there is not. The arrangement that is put into place should be one that shows that.
What did you make of the comments that we got from Tehran that the nuclear installations were, quote, badly damaged? Because, and look, I'm not a military strategist, but just basic logic, as I think this through, would be if I wanted to hide a nuclear program, or if I wanted people to think that I wasn't doing enrichment, I would say that facilities were damaged and not allowing me to do these enrichment activities. Is that a fair way to look at these comments from Tehran?
It could be. It's also admitting what is clearly the truth. There were thousands of tons of explosives dropped on these facilities. They are going to be heavily damaged. And that, I think, is merely accepting reality.
And bottom line, I mean, do we ultimately know where the uranium is and where that pile's been moved? We don't know that, do we?
We don't. The enriched uranium is in a highly transportable form and containers that can be moved relatively easily from one place to another. So this is something also that if I were on the negotiation team, I would make a point of asking for early on in the process. Where is the uranium? Can we have an accounting for it? Can we have some tracking and transparency on where it is? And as part of the final arrangement, I would want some accountability and some safeguards placed on that material. That's very dangerous.
How do you view the role of members of Congress? And the reason I ask here is because Axios reported just in the last 90 minutes that the president is set to limit sharing of classified information with Congress after this leak on the Iran bombing damage. Is that, in your view, a move that could make it more difficult for the United States and members of the United States Congress to sort of understand national security issues that affect the nation?
Well, there are two issues. The first is that the information leaked. I don't know that it leaked from Congress, but it leaked, and that's unfortunate, and that absolutely should not happen. This is highly sensitive classified information, and everybody who has access to it should know the procedures for maintaining control of it.
John Erath, Senior Policy Director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Well, once again, Iran said its nuclear installations were, quote, badly damaged by U.S. airstrikes. These comments coming just hours after President Trump disputed a U.S. intelligence report that said the attacks had limited impact on Iran's nuclear program below ground. Meantime, the president said that he had a good meeting with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky at the NATO summit in The Hague. Needless to say, a lot happening around the world, and especially a lot happening if you're thinking about political risk. And that's what Kevin Kajiwara does. He's managing director and co-president at Teneo Intelligence. He focuses on geopolitics. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. In our introduction, we talked about two different things. One is the latest from Iran and the relationship between Israel and Iran and how the U.S. fits into that, or lack thereof, relationship. And then two, the latest when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the war between Russia and Ukraine. You also have geopolitical risk, I think, here at home in New York City with the shock upset in a Democratic primary last night that business leaders are trying to digest today. What is the biggest risk to your clients right now?
Well, I think you highlighted just the variety of issues that are out there, right? And the fact that they are all happening at the same time. What's more typical historically, right, is to have a number of sort of discrete events and you can respond to each of them. But these now happening with greater frequency, they are happening simultaneously, and they are therefore compounding on one another in ways that, you look at any individual issue and you might question why the market reacts in that way. But there's really, there's a lot of different inputs coming in. So I think that the challenge for, say, a CEO or frankly an institutional investor for that matter, but for a CEO is, how do I triage everything that's going on and what is actually kind of signal for the business that I'm in versus trying to cut through all that noise?
Well, that's where I want to go, Kevin, because companies are going public, right? IPOs are happening. Companies are doing deals. Companies are making decisions. They're spending CapEx. So like, what are you hearing from the community about, like, what are the lines to say, all right, I'm ready to pull the trigger on spending money or hiring people or expanding versus it's just too unclear, I'm out?
Well, I think the way that they look at it is that uncertainty is essentially a tax, or it is effectively a tax in the sense that it perverts what would be otherwise normal economic behavior, right? So in other words, if you were trying to anticipate tariffs, you probably tied up capital building inventory that you wouldn't otherwise do. Or because you have no visibility on what the runway is looking like, you're going to hold off on that potential M&A transaction or opening that new factory or rejiggering the supply chain in some way, shape, or form. So I think, though, that while there's this realization that there's a lot going on, there's a lot of uncertainty, CEOs, just like the president himself, always making decisions based on imperfect information, and now it's perhaps more imperfect than usual. But any moment that you get that clarity and there's an opportunity, you and your CFO had better be ready to act and be able to commit that capital.
On the uncertainty tax, on the uncertainty side of this, there's certainly geopolitical uncertainty, but there's also the uncertainty about policies that are coming out of Washington, that are coming out of the White House. And we've seen this sort of changing way that companies are speaking or communicating with the president, especially companies outside of the United States announcing investments, companies in the United States announcing investments in the U.S. How would you say that your clients, or you're advising your clients to communicate with Washington, to communicate with the president?
Well, look, I think that there's the issue is that it gets really bespoke really quickly, depending on the sensitivity of the industry you're in, depending the country that you're from and what the trade relationship is or the overall nature of the relationship is. So you have to take all of those things into consideration. I think that there is a focus, perhaps a greater indexation, if you will, on things that are going to resonate well, and via avenues that will resonate well with this, with this administration and with this president, right? So for some people, that means we've got to go to Mar-a-Lago. For some people, that means appearing on certain news outlets. And in others, it means taking...
for executives?
Yeah, sure.
We saw Jamie Dimon, I think it's fair to say, Carol, communicate that morning on Fox with Maria Bartiromo.
Yeah.
And it seemed like he made his message known to Washington through that interview.
So
it was an audience of one.
So understanding that going on there, that President Trump is listening.
Yes.
And watching.
Absolutely.
Huh. We've had a lot of conversations here. Like, it's just amazing, the fear of executives to speak out in the United States of America. Give me what intel, and I understand you can't tell us specifics and stuff, but I'm just curious, like, what is kind of the psyche of the corporate clients that you're dealing with, and why there is that fear?
Well, I
understand if you're publicly held, you don't want to be a target, but aren't you surprised? I mean, these are leaders that are supposed to speak out when things are, maybe they don't agree with things.
Well, I think that there's a hierarchy of leaders, right? You just mentioned Jamie Dimon, who's probably the closest thing we've got to sort of a head of state level chief executive in this country, and perhaps further in power. But it also plays into his own personality. He is comfortable in that role in the way that not every executive is, I think. But secondly, I think this has forced executives not necessarily to shrink, but to refocus on what's important to them, their industry, their company, the stakeholders they have, and to focus in on those things rather than feeling like they need to weigh in and opine on every single issue that is out there.
So you think that's a good thing?
Well, I think it's just the new reality. I don't think any of these things are good things or bad things. It's just the thing. Yeah. This is the environment that we are currently in. That environment will change 4 years from now, and they'll shift again. Because
it's such a swing if you think you go from the murder of George Floyd and COVID, and executives were out talking about everything, and we thought that there was this real opening, and then it just feels like, I understand pendulum swing, but it swung another in another
of course,
direction.
the other thing is action, right? And I think being on the other side of this now, right, where we're looking at, for instance, DE&I initiatives, right, being rolled back in terms of how they're promoted and so on and so forth. But a lot of executives have bought with their stakeholders and their employees and their customer bases. They've bought a lot of goodwill because of the actions that they have taken over the years. And now, even if you change the website a little bit or something of that nature, but you remain committed because you can see the bottom line positive impact of these types of policies, you've got a lot of goodwill already built in with your stakeholders.
So you consider the stakeholders the ones who work for you, the employees, as a group of stakeholders. You don't necessarily talk about the DEI policies outside of the company in the same way, or maybe you don't even talk about them internally in the same way, but perhaps you did see a return on the investment, so you keep doing those things and you call them something else? Like what happens here?
There's elements with it. And, and Teneo is a perfect example of the type of company that has a lot of people who are devoted toward helping executives, kind of thread this needle, so to speak. And some need more help than others. And also, it's an awareness of who your audience is, who your customer base is. Some are going to respond, and we all know the companies, right, where, where taking certain stands has stood them in good stead with their audiences, and others who've had a more challenging time. So it's about being smart and surgical about this.
But you've seen cycles. Like I think about, in this world, and I think about the great financial crisis, there's COVID, there's just so much stuff, war overseas, different presidents and so on and so forth. How do you describe this cycle? And how do you think a lot of CEOs, and I hate to dump everybody in a bucket because it's just not the way the world works, but I am just curious, historically, business-wise, economically, the role of the United States in the world, like how do you see this cycle?
There is something changing right now. And this is not just a cycle. This is a secular change, right? And this is something that can no longer be punted down the road. In other words, the decisions that CEOs are making today are existential decisions for their companies, and whether they are going to be, nimble enough to be some of the winners on the other side. Think about it in the context of like climate change as an example, right? Remember a few years ago, companies, managements were, making zero carbon commitments and the like. Yeah. But the reality of it was like a generation or two down the road of management that would actually have to implement that. That was an easy commitment to make, in a sense, right?
Exactly.
But right now, like you say, the playing field is actually fundamentally changing, and it is not hyperbolic to say that it's a paradigmatic shift right now. But it is this generation of leadership that's having to have the situational awareness and kind of realize that even though you've got all these balls in the air right now with the just-in-time, just what's happening right now with trade, with the geopolitics, with the fiscal bill,
so this isn't
all
just
of that,
a presidential administration thing.
No, not at all.
So you're talking about supply chains. You're talking about what AI? What does that mean?
What we think of as the international rules-based order, right? Which is a system that has that laid the groundwork for the multinational corporation to be the single most important economic actor. If that is evolving, if the role of the U.S. is evolving, is it axiomatic that those same economic actors are going to be the big winners in the next, or do you have to be nimble enough to be thinking ahead of how this might change? I mean, this interim period, I don't know if it's going to be long or short. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like on the other side, but those who are aware, it's like Eisenhower said, right? The plan is worthless when the first bullet flies, but planning is everything, right?
So
interesting.
Putting you on the spot, net, is this a positive development in the work that you do?
Well, I mean, I think so, in the sense that it is inevitable that, over time, strategic decisions have been made predicated on a certain perspective on what the global operating environment is going to look like. And then all your other decisions stem from that.
The global operating environment being a world of liberal democracies,
but not just that, right?
There's
this ability to take advantage of the free flow of labor, free flow of capital, a just-in-time global supply chain system, opening of markets, all of that, right? The sort of the key variables of globalization.
Right.
If that's shifting, right? If that's shifting, you've got to start scenario planning for how that might impact your business. 25
seconds. It's a question Tim and I like to ask a lot of folks who come on here, because in January we thought about American exceptionalism a lot. Is that going away? And forgive me, only about 25 seconds.
Look, the United States has certain built-in advantages: scale, the English language, the dollar, an economic ecosystem and financing ecosystem that finds phenomenal ideas and can bring them to market, and so on and so forth. Nobody else has got that still, even with all the challenges we've got.
What a great conversation. Kevin, thank you so much. Come back sooner. Don't wait so long.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Kevin Kajawara, he's Managing Director, Co-President at Teneo Intelligence. This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
I'm driving in my car.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. This is not a toy.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, TikTok, everybody. We're coming up on about 18 minutes to go until we wrap up the trade on this Wednesday, June 25th. Where the heck did June go?
It is behind us, Carol. We can only look forward to the third quarter of the year.
What are you, like in Hamilton or something?
You know, did
you
I
start rapping like it's
did
a
I
year
say
in Hamilton?
this yesterday
What?
on air? I think I said it not
What?
on air. I've never seen Hamilton.
I know. I don't even know why I can share space
I lived in
with
New York
you.
for 15 years and I've never seen Hamilton.
You're like, you got to see Hamilton. It's really, really good. It's
Yeah.
even on, you can watch it on streaming.
I know, but I like I said, I don't want
Great.
to watch it on streaming without seeing it on Broadway.
Don't get us singing.
All right.
Okay,
We don't have the rights to that music.
All right, we've got the S&P little change down 2 points, 129 to the downside on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, if you care about that index. And the NASDAQ 100 up 22 points, up 0.1%. This is kind of I almost feel like a sideways move. Let's see what Jeanette Garrity has to say about all of it. She's managing director, chief economist at the wealth management firm Robertson Stephens. She's joining us from Menlo Park, California. Robertson Stephens, by the way, has about $7.1 billion in assets under management. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you guys?
Okay. You know, another week where a lot comes at us. We had a rally yesterday. Today feels like we don't know where we're going. Tell us what your clients come to you or your team comes to you and says, you know, I don't understand where we go from here or what's next or what's top of mind.
Well, you know, actually, they haven't, at least in the last 6 weeks, they haven't been saying so much of where do we go from here as where can I go from here? Where are the opportunities? What am I going to do? Certainly, everybody feels a bit better than they did in April. I don't know, and I think the market reflects that. The equity markets reflect that. The amount, as you said, like, just look at this week. I mean, the news cycle this week is head spinning. The last couple of weeks, and so it's just kind of interesting. I think people are energized. They're trying to find opportunities. But there are still a lot of challenges out there, and so it's a little bit more about reminding them what some of those might be.
Well, what's the biggest challenge that you see right now? I mean, if we were to talk to you back in April, I think it would have been navigating tariff policy. Here we are 2 months later, just a few days away from that July 9th deadline for the extension of some of those tariffs. Is that the biggest challenge for investors, navigating what these companies are going to do in the face of changing policy or uncertain policy?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is, let's not say tariffs, but trade in general. You know, just figuring out the relationships that are in place, what new relationships are maybe going to be in place. Some of that is influenced by tariffs. Some of that is influenced by geopolitics. As we've seen, the topic of the day, the disruptions in the Middle East. Trade is changing in front of our eyes. These relationships are changing. So I think that is a big challenge. And maybe the fundamental challenge from investors is it's not an easy environment, perhaps, in which to pick winners and losers, because a lot of it is going to come down to company management, how dynamic you are, the right educated guesses that you make. We're going to see winners and losers everywhere, and a lot of it is, some of it's going to be luck, some of it's going to be skill. Better to be lucky and good, actually, not just one.
So we talked earlier with our Tyler Kendall about kind of the next couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks or so, that are facing President Trump. And there's a lot on his docket, you know, wanting to get this tax and spending bill done. He's got a deadline on that one. The deadline ticking on the imposition of higher tariffs against some of our allies, or really on everyone. So it's a lot on his plate. Are you anticipating that he does an extension, pushes it down the road? And so we continue to live in this world of uncertainty as we get ready to kick off another earnings season, and we'll see what that means for companies. But what's your take on that? Do you expect things get done, or do you think it just gets pushed down the road?
Oh, I do think things get done, but we're not sure what thing, and we're not sure what done really means, right? So there are going to be deals. We'll see how he feels coming back from NATO. That'll be about more than just NATO. That'll be about who he sat down with and how the conversations went. It's also a bit about the people around him and what they think they can be able to achieve. Look at Chairman Powell in the press conference last week had this nice little unappreciated distinction between risk and uncertainty. And he said the level of uncertainty is down, but the risk is still high. And what he was getting at is uncertainty means you can't see anything at all, if you will. You can't see at all what might happen. Risk is that you have a wide range of outcomes. So I think more so than in April, we sort of know what's going on out there. There are these trade negotiations, occasionally a trade fight. There are these surprises that are going to be coming out of the One Big Budget Bill Act, OBA. So we know what that sort of is. I know we know what that sort of.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah.
Wait, is that?
I didn't hear you say. I didn't hear you say beautiful.
Yeah.
One Big Beautiful Act. Excuse me, I left out beautiful.
Okay.
It's so much easier just to say OBA, right? It's
I'm
so much easier
saying that. I haven't heard that yet.
No, because I'm not saying the other thing.
That's why you say it, because you lose track of the B's. But so you know that's there. You know the general parameters. You can see, but the range of outcomes from any of these things is very large, and I think that's what defines the variability and the volatility as we go into the third quarter. So that's still there.
Okay, so we just want to end hearing what you're hearing from clients right now. Your client, you're in Menlo Park. You're in the heart of Silicon Valley. I imagine your clients, a lot of high net worth individuals who made their money in technology. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. Yes. What do you hear from them?
I think what I hear is, please tell me that I can think like the growth investor that I really genetically am predisposed to be. There's a lot of focus on growth. There's a lot of focus on AI. I think in looking at the fundamentals, I want to broaden it from AI. There's an understanding of what the secular trends are, tight labor markets, slow labor force growth, predictions for slower economic growth. How do we ride the wave that will kind of get us to a different place? What can we do? Where can we be that will be consistent with what we think is going to happen, which is people are going to strive for doing something new and different, and higher growth, higher labor productivity. And I think that has merit. I think that is where we are going to be. This remains an extremely dynamic economy. Look at everything that has been thrown at this.
Well,
and yet we're here, and right now the difference between today and April is people saying, I can figure it out.
Jeanette, we got to run. Jeanette Garrity, Managing Director, Chief Economist at Robertson Stephens, joining us from Menlo Park, California.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.